Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. In this video I'd like to give you guys a tour of my newly planted tropical bed. Now I did a previous video on this, so I can put in the links at the end of this video so you can see how I prepared the ground and got it all ready. But it was quite a challenge. I go through some of that in this video, but I'll go more in depth in some older previous videos. So this bed I probably only planted up about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I've been very busy with my wedding and things like that, so I've been a bit late getting this planted this year. It was planted around the 20th of July, which is a bit late. I did have to wait until at least the middle of June though, because we have quite late frosts here in North Scotland, so that's part of the reason I waited so long. But to be honest, ideally I would have done it about a month earlier. So there's only been about 4 weeks of growth, but the plants have grown a lot since I put them in. So I'm going to go through each plant, or at least each type of plant, tell you how they're doing, tell you what plants they are, and then at the end I'll show you what the soil looks like now, how the mulch system has worked, and also I'll look into other things such as the amount of stones I took out and concrete as well. So the main plants I have in this bed, or at least most architectural plants, will be the banana plants, and they're the ones you can see here. Now there's 3 different types of banana plant that I've got in here. The most numerous is the Musa Sikimensis, which is one of the ones that I grew from seed. The Musa Sikimensis, they come from high altitude parts of the Himalayas, so they're used to colder weather and they can handle some slight frosts. Now the top half will die down to the ground with hard frost, but the roots should normally survive, especially if they're well mulched. So there's 3 here, which are the 3 largest ones, and I've also got quite a small one just down here as well. These have been growing quite well, and interestingly, once I put them in the soil, the roots really started to get down and massive leaves started to appear. So the big leaves haven't really appeared much, or not yet anyway, but you can see here this new leaf is much larger than the last one. It's got a big new one coming through, and interestingly enough, when I look at this one at the back here, this new leaf is going to be much bigger than the previous leaf. It's probably going to be at least double the size, because normally you can tell it's going to be a big leaf if it gets quite long without unfurling, and this one hasn't got any signs of unfurling yet, so that's going to be enormous. Same is happening with my other banana. This is my Musa basjoo banana. This is probably the best known hardy banana there is. This is the one that most people grow in their gardens. It's the hardiest type of banana, and you can see the new leaf is coming through quite large. A little bit of damage, we did have a caterpillar on here, but it's generally doing okay. The Musa basjoo for me doesn't seem to grow quite as well in the Scottish climate. I think even though it's a hardier banana, it prefers slightly warmer temperatures in the summer, and so for me personally, I find the sikkimensis seems to grow a lot better. And I'm going to do a video about my bananas later this summer, and I'll show you one that's in my parents' garden that's been planted for about a month and a half, and that's really taken off. And despite being the smallest of them all, has actually overtaken all of these, and it's looking fantastic now. And then the last banana, which is technically not a banana, but it is related in the same family. This is an Ensete ventricosum, and the variety is Maurelii, which this variety has a lovely kind of bronzing and red colours to the leaves. This as well has done quite well. It's only just started to get going. You can see that the most recent leaf was a lot bigger and wider than the previous leaves, and this new one again is probably going to be a lot bigger. So apart from that, the biggest plant I have here is going to be the one at the back, which is my giant tree dahlia. So this is the tree dahlia. This was planted in the garden actually before the rest of the plants. Basically I didn't have the whole bed done at once. I started off with the tree dahlia, my Paulownia, a couple of cannas, and then my giant Calla Lily. So this has actually been in the bed for about a month and a half now. It lost all its leaves originally, and I'll show you a picture of what that looked like now. But basically all the leaves were toasted off because I couldn't acclimatise it to the outside weather conditions. It was in too big a heavy pot for me to bring in and out every day like I would with my other tropical plants. So it got toasted by the sun. We had some very high UV levels, and all the leaves basically got burnt off. But it's completely re-sprouted now. I did actually lose 2 branches in the last 2 days. We had some very strong winds, but the main branches have survived, fortunately. You can see lower down here, this is a place where one of the main branches broke off just there, and there was another one on the other side. But generally it's growing well. It's got lots of side branches now because the top was damaged when I moved it. It sprouted lots of side branches, but it's a really big plant, and considering how small this was when I got it at the beginning of the year, it was just a tiny little stick. This has definitely grown the biggest and the fastest out of all my plants. And with this growing a giant tuber underneath the ground this summer, it'll be interesting to see how big it will get next year. So I've also got my Paulownia tree down here. This is the one out of all my seedlings that had the biggest leaves. Its leaves have got a little bit smaller now that it's in the ground. I think because it's more windswept, but that's doing quite well. My cannas are just starting to flower, but as I said in my last video, there's real signs of canna virus, so these will probably have to be destroyed. I won't keep them for next year. You can see here the classic kind of streaks you get from canna virus, so that's a real disappointment. These will just slowly get weaker and weaker, and they can transmit the virus to other Canna Lilies, so definitely be getting rid of these, which is a real shame. And then at the back here, I've got my giant Canna Lily. Bit of a confusing when this is a Calla and this is a Canna, basically double N, double L in the name, but this grows very differently. This is much hardier than a Canna, and this should be able to survive evergreen. If we have light frost, hard frost, it'll lose its leaves. This again was a really small plant back in February. We got it to a decent size over winter. When I first arrived, it was just a small shoot, and its original leaf was actually smaller than this tiny leaf down here. And as you can see now, it's quite a large plant. It grew bigger and bigger leaves. The biggest leaf was probably this one, or maybe there was one slightly bigger than that. It then shot up a flower shoot, which was this one here, and it stopped producing any more leaves. It then started to put all these little babies up, and that's why the leaves are smaller again, because these leaves here are actually from a new one, so they're still sizing up, getting bigger. And then all around the side, there's all these little baby plants coming up, so it's really dividing now and becoming a collection of small plants. And this is the latest flower that is put up. Eventually these could get to 6 or 7 foot in height. Probably not in my position because it's quite sunny and windy. If this was in a more sheltered spot with a bit more shade, these can get really big, become really big plants. And when they're in the conservatory, they were certainly getting quite big quite quick. So be interested to see how these go. This won't be a permanent addition to the bed. I'll be moving this to another position in the garden where it's a bit more sheltered. But for this year, I just needed to get it planted in the garden, so it's been doing quite well here. So looking around here, I've also got a couple of other hardy plants. Now, when it comes to all of these plants, the ones that I'm saying are hardy, they're really just hardy at the root level. The frost will kill them down to the ground, with the exception of the Trachycarpus palm here and the Paulownia trees. Everything is just really hardy at root level, and they're herbaceous plants that die down. The bananas, if I put a lot of time and effort and insulate the stems, I could keep them above ground, but depends how cold my winter is. Normally most winters I expect them to die to the ground as well. So I've got two types of gingers. This is the one that grew the fastest, and it grew quite tall when it was inside. It is looking like it might be about to form a flower bud, possibly in this older stem, but this is growing quite nicely, and it's got 3 stems now. It's a more slender variety, and I'll give you the name if I can find the label down here. So this one is Telstar 4, and you can see there's a new ginger shoot coming up there. This is clumping up nicely. This was actually very tiny, as I say, just one little shoot. That shoot grew quite tall, and the newer shoots are slightly thicker and will probably grow taller than the original one. And this is the other ginger. This ginger I think is wardii. This is quite a different looking ginger, just as hardy, but you can see the leaves are much wider, and the stems are much thicker as well. So this one's actually sized up even more than the other one. The other one was always a decent size shoot on it. This one, the first shoot was quite small, as you can see here, and then put up the second shoot, which is much bigger, and it's just started to put up a third shoot. But I suspect somewhere hiding in the mulch there's probably more shoots coming up, and this again will just get bigger and bigger every year, as long as I can protect the roots. And if I'm really lucky, I might get flowers. I did start them inside this year to give them a head start, which is why I think this one over here is showing signs of a possible flower bud coming up at the top. So what I might do at the end of the summer is split these gingers up, leave half of them in the ground, see if they survive my winters, and the other half I'll put in the conservatory, keep it protected in case these do die from the frost. But also with growing them inside, I can get them getting to a decent height before I put them outside, and they'll have more chance of flowering. I don't mind if these don't flower. I have quite short cold summers here in Scotland, so it's really just for the leaf effect, but if I can get flowers, that would be a big advantage. So one of the plants that will become one of the biggest eventually is this Trachycarpus palm here. This is Trachycarpus fortunei, a very common palm for people who know hardy palms. It's basically the best hardy palm you can grow in the UK. It doesn't mind the cool summers, and it's hardy down to about -15. And this will grow really big eventually. So if I step back slightly, you can see I've actually set it about 1 meter away from the fence, because this will grow by about 1 meter in each direction, so maybe 2 meters wide in total, and that'll fill a big area. That's also why I've not planted any banana trees in this area, and the only plants that are nearby are either small, like the gingers, which will be more like a lower story plant, or it's the lily that I'm going to be moving later in the year. So other plants I've got dotted around here. just to kind of fill up the space until the plants have grown a bit more, are my castor oil plants. So you can see there's quite a few dotted around. I just planted these from seed early in the year just to give me some foliage interest. Now these were probably about 3 or 4 times the size if I had put them in the ground at the right time, but I hadn't got the ground prepared yet, so these were in small pots most of the summer. That's really stunted their size, so although they look nice and they got decent sized leaves, they are much smaller than they should be. I'll put up a video soon of my front garden bed, and you'll see that one which I planted probably about a month and a half ago, and that's already enormous. So these might get quite big by the end of summer, but certainly they're not as big as they could have got if I had put them out at the right time of year. But these are just annuals, just growing for their foliage. They should get about the size of that tree peony at the back, possibly bigger if I had a longer, hotter summer, but they just give me a nice bit of foliage display. And next year, once they die off from the frost, I probably won't put them back in this bed, because hopefully the bananas will be bigger by then and they'll be quite full. And I might plant them elsewhere in the garden because I've still got a lot of the rest of the garden to finish, but so I'll definitely grow them again next year, but just not in this bed. So other plants that are doing well, I've got lots of Oxalis Triangularis. These have grown really well. I did a video out these probably about 3 or 4 months ago. I'll put the link in now so you can have a look at them. Basically, I had a very old plant, I separated it up into little 9cm pots. Those little pots grew on quite nicely, and these are this is the result from them a few months later. As you can see, it's as big, or maybe even slightly bigger than the original mother plant now. There's loads of new shoots coming up as well. You can see the new leaves. It's been flowering non-stop all summer, so these are done really well, and these are just going to make a nice ground cover. Now eventually I'll probably put a different ground cover in here because it's quite a sunny bed, and these are good for shady locations, so I'll probably save these for a shadier bed eventually. But I just wanted to get them in the ground. They'll look great this year, and then maybe next year I'll transplant them and put them in a shadier part of the garden. And that goes the same with these other plants that are dotted around, which are my Begonia grandis, which is a hardy begonia. I'll just take you around to one that's just starting to come into flower. So this one here is the one that's the furthest along out of any of the begonia plants. As you can see, it's just starting to come into flower. The flowers aren't particularly exciting with Begonia grandis, it's more just the leaves I'm going for, and the fact that I can grow a begonia outside that can survive my winters, it's just a nice kind of novelty. So these have been growing well. Again, I did a video in spring, and I'll put the link into the iCard now. These were tiny little bulbules, just like tiny little bulbs basically. Planted them in the conservatory, grew them on for a few months, and then when the frost disappeared, had them hardening off outside, and I planted these just 3 or 4 weeks ago, and they're already looking quite good. They're sending up quite a lot of new shoots as well. They basically just had that one shoot when they first came up, but you can see underneath there's actually quite a lot of new shoots appearing, so they're bulking up nicely. They should survive my winters, but if they don't, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all the little bulbules, which should appear in autumn, just between the leaf and the main stem. I can grow them in the conservatory over winter, and that'll be just like an insurance policy in case the main ones outside die from the frost. At least I've got some growing inside which can take over. And the good thing with the begonias is they can handle really low light levels, so this bed isn't ideal for them now. Same with the Oxalis, can grow in such low light levels that I can put them where other plants won't survive, so they're going to be an understory plant, smothered by other plants, but these are going to go in a shadier part of the garden, which is the opposite bed behind me. They're just here at the moment just to get them growing in the soil, see how they do. These will probably be transplanted next year, and I'll be planting this up with a more tropical style ground cover. So I had hoped to get a lot more cannas as a ground cover plant. Most of the cannas died, they had canna virus. Some of them are really poor. You can see I've got 1 or 2 left, but most of them are badly destroyed by canna virus. So all these cannas I'll be getting rid of. I might try growing some next year from seed. And I'm also going to try a few other ground cover plants, tropical style, just to get these growing and covering the ground. I might look for some smaller types of gingers. My gingers grow to about 1 meter tall. There's a few other types of gingers that are hardy that grow to maybe only about 1 or 2 foot, so I might also put them in for ground cover. And once the bananas get a bit taller as well, even if I do have plants which are 1 foot or so tall, it won't look too bad, because at the moment if I have 1 or 2 foot tall ground cover, it would smother the bananas, but next year when the bananas will be bigger, it will act quite nicely as a ground cover. The bananas can grow right through. The only other plant I have in here is this nasturtium, which isn't hardy, but it had just self-seeded on my garden, so I just transplanted it, put it in here. I'm going to give it loads of feed. It should just spread like crazy. This will probably cover half the bed before the frost comes. Once they get going, they're really fast growing, especially with good soil conditions, and that will form somewhat of a ground cover come autumn time. I don't know what colour it is, it was self-seeded, but that'll be a nice annual, and that's something I might use in this bed in the future as a quick ground cover, especially until I find enough and the right type of ground cover that I'm looking for. I might just use that as a quick, easy solution to a tropical appearance ground cover. So I'd now like to give a slight update on the ground and how this was when I was digging it over. Unfortunately, there was a lot of rubbish in here that I had to dispose of, basically mainly bricks and concrete. This ground has obviously been used as a garden for several years. There was an old gravel path here which was a bit of an issue. My biggest issue though was just the edge of this corner here. There was a massive foundation casting of concrete for basically a clothes area. It was the biggest closed area concrete cast I'd ever seen. It's probably about 2 or 3 foot wide by about 2 or 3 foot deep, so far too heavy for me to really easily get out of the ground. So what I did is, because 3/4 of it was underneath this slab here and a couple of other slabs over there, I just chipped the edge off with a lump hammer, and I've just planted just to the side of it, so it probably comes out to about here. That's a massive piece of concrete and a bit of metal as well. The metal is actually around about ground level, but it's covered now with the mulch, so that was one of the issues. Other issues was all the bricks. It appears that this ground might have been for metalworks originally. I found quite a lot of slag. There's nothing on the old historical maps. The historical maps don't have any detail after 150 years, so probably early Victorian, maybe even medieval. I'm not too sure about timing it for history, but there was a lot of these fire bricks that I found. A lot of them have burn marks, and they also have a mortar, which to me doesn't, you can see the internals of that brick isn't in like any kind of brick that I know of. It looks like to me like a fire brick. And there was also quite a lot of stones, and the mortar around the stones was a bit more like a lime mortar, so probably medieval, something quite old. And then there was all these old modern concrete bricks as well. They were just done as edging. And then here's a selection of the stones as well. This is more of what the fire bricks look like, more that red colour. You can see here as well, and there was other bits of metal as well, just I wasn't sure what they were from. And then of course there was loads of stones, and this shows a bit more of those kind of fire bricks as well. Modern cement, lots of different types of stones that seem to have a bit of cement on them, just a real mixture really. You can even see there's a bit of quartz there from one of the stones, which looks quite nice. Might even have fool's gold in it or something. It looks quite shiny. But generally, yeah, loads of stones I had to take out, very poor soil. I'll show you now what the soil looked like originally and what the soil looks like now that it's been improved, but it was a lot of work. I had to spend quite a bit of money on compost, which I wasn't planning on doing. I was hoping to find a cheap source of compost, but there doesn't seem to be any cheap compost in my area, so I had to fork out a bit extra. But I've mulched it now. I've gone into more detail about that in another video, which I'll put in a link for. But basically, the soil was really bad. It needed a lot of work. You can see here some of that like cement, which might be a bit more like lime mortar. So I'm not an expert, but there seems to be kind of shells or something in there. So definitely a bit of history in the garden, but as I say, I don't really know what it's from, but possibly metal workings. So I kept a piece of the original soil. This is it here. As you can see, it's really quite solid. This has actually been out for about a month, and we've had torrential rain, we've had flash floods, actually the heaviest rain we've had on record, and this hasn't broken apart. It's basically solid. You can see quite a few rocks in there. There's also maybe some coal or charcoal, something like that. You can see it's solid. When it does get broken apart, it just turns into this dust. Absolutely no organic matter. It's a really horrible soil. That's basically what it started with. What we have now is this nice rich soil. You can see it's high in organic matter, it's nice and dark. It's also nice and loose as well, and that's really going to help the plants a lot. And then I've mulched it as well with all these wood chips, which are starting to rot down now and provide goodness to the soil. And I was fortunate enough to find in my local garden centre this old water-soluble beneficial bacteria and mycorrhizal fungi, so I watered that on into the soil as well, which should help to rot down the wood chips, and it will link up with the root systems of the plants and give them a real boost. So that's all for this video. I'll see you guys at the end of summer when I give you an update, show you how much it's grown. I'm expecting some really quite good growth from this. It is getting towards the end of summer now, so it really depends on how the rest of our summer pans out. If we we get an early frost in 2 or 3 weeks, they'll be killed off then. If I'm lucky, it could last for another 2 or 3 months.